The reason why we're recording it is because we want to make sure that people who did not have the chance to be with us tonight have the ability to see the information that we're going to provide. My name is Tedman. I am the event team lead for the Braver Angels Military and Veterans Group. But for the rest of the night, I will be known as the chair. And I'm very excited to have you with us, and I believe you will find this event of great value to you personally. Now, please note, throughout this event, we will keep you muted unless you are called upon. Please help us by keeping yourself muted. We have enabled closed captions.
Tedman, you're muted.
Have I been muted this whole time? I apologize.
No, just
the last 2
now?
seconds.
Okay, interesting. Okay. All right. Sorry, folks. Lost my place. Okay, so the instructions that we're giving you now are going to be put into the chat. This is not a debate. We're not going to create a resolution. We are not finding the best answer, the right answer, or any other answer. We are not solving a problem. This is a forum where you can say what you believe. None of us here should represent a side, but be here as individual explorers. So this is an opportunity for each of us to share where they are on this journey of trying to understand the Israel-Hamas conflict. And this is not a linear journey where one person is further along than someone else. There is no correct destination to this journey. Now, some of what you might hear tonight might make you feel mad or uncomfortable. You may feel others had the facts completely wrong. Everything you hear will be biased, and that is the point. We can't provide unbiased perspectives as we can only see the world through our own eyes. And tonight, we have the great gift of getting to glimpse through the eyes of others. So we expect your speeches to reflect your bias. Maximize this opportunity by giving your honest personal viewpoint to others and asking genuine questions of curiosity. Now, tonight we're going to follow a parliamentary style of presentation. So I am the chair. You will refer to me by the title, the chair or Mr. Chair, as in, I would like to thank the chair for that question. You can only speak if I recognize you. You only give your speeches to me, though everyone's going to be able to hear you. You only ask your questions to me, though all can hear you. And we do it this way so no one feels attacked, as I am the only one who could attack you, and I will not. I want to hear what you have to say and your questions. So do not speak directly to other participants, only to me, the chair. Do not refer to other participants by name or the second personal pronoun you. For example, you might ask me a question like, I would like to thank the previous speaker for their speech and would like to ask them how they feel such death can be justified. Instead of speaking directly to the speaker with, Dave, how can you feel such death is justified? I may choose to help you with the wording of your question to ensure it is a question of curiosity and sometimes help you get to the question. This is going to feel a little weird at first, but you'll get used to it. I think you'll see the value of doing it this way. You are just here to be you, not an expert. We want to hear what you are thinking. So hearing how your personal story connects with this issue is even better. To help us stay true to this, I recommend you start your speech with, Mr. Chair, this is what I think about the Israel-Hamas conflict. We have a very large number of people in attendance tonight, so most of us will simply be listening. But if you want to give a speech and share your view with us, please send a chat to one of our participant managers saying, I would like to speak. That's all you need to say. If your last name begins with the letters A through M, send your chat to Tim Gustafson. You'll see their names at the top of the list of the participants. If your last name begins with N through Z, send your chat to Mike Shand. Note their last names fit into the sections they are working. Now you can open your chat window by selecting the chat icon at the bottom of the Zoom window, and you will be able to send a chat only to my team. So I can keep focused, I will not be monitoring the chat. I will ask my participant managers for the next person, alternating between them, to offer a speech. We will not have time for everyone, but we will give those who speak 3 minutes each. When you have 30 seconds remaining, I will ask you to please sum up. If you give a speech, try to avoid using inciting rhetoric. But know here and now that I will allow most things. It is important that our voice is heard in a democracy, and protecting our democracy is what we in the military and vets signed up to do. After each speech, I, the chair, will allow 2 questions of curiosity. If you have a question, raise your electronic hand. Ensure you can find it now at the bottom of the Zoom window. Participant managers will call on people to ask questions, at which time you will unmute and ask your question to the chair. Do not give a speech if you're called on for a question. Questions should be short and to the point, and the speaker should try to keep responses to 1 minute. Once we have moved on from questions to the next speech, don't use your speech to ask questions. If you have not been selected to speak, you will be muted. Our goal is to try to listen to as many different voices as possible when it comes to either speeches or questions. If you have questions about these procedures or anything else, please ask our participant managers via the chat. One last note before we start. If you are a U.S. active duty, Guard or reservist, or a military veteran and would like to know more about the Military and Veterans Group or Braver Angels, we have our next welcome event on the 12th of March, and a link is in the chat. Now, to provide us about 25 or so minutes of background on the current Israel-Hamas conflict, we have Daniel Pomerantz and Steve Plotkin. If you think they are giving you a biased perspective, they are. Again, our perspectives represent our own personal biases. This is theirs, and we are excited to hear yours. Their introduction will set us up to enjoy each other's company as we ponder this very complex and emotionally charged issue. So let us start our journey of exploration. Steve Plotkin is a retired entrepreneur in the technology section and a business owner. He is an Army veteran and recent member of Braver Angels, and he is a national VP for Volunteers for Israel Incorporated and has a long interest in Israeli affairs. Daniel Pomerantz is the CEO of Reality Check, a nonprofit organization that supports global conversations with verifiable data. An adjunct professor at Reichman and Bar Ilan universities in Israel, and previously a practicing attorney, Daniel writes and speaks professionally on international law. Daniel lives in Tel Aviv, and so I've got to say a big thank you to him because it's after 2 a.m. for him. And you can learn more at realitycheckresearch.org. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Strap in and relax. We're going to take a quick dive into the wacky Middle East, but there will be no test. First, realize that in the Middle East, they all read and write backwards. That's true. Arabic, Hebrew, Farsi, it all goes right to left. Second, there are spectacular successful states in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Emirates, Abu Dhabi. Also, there are spectacular failing states in the Middle East, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen. Much of that turns out to be based on regional clans. Nope. All right, okay. That's our goal. We're going to try to make you a little smarter quicker. This is Familiar Symphony. On Saturday, October 7th at midnight, all was quiet in the Middle East. At 6:30 in the morning, as it shows here, da 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 da, da 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 da, opening notes to Beethoven's Fifth, but also the code, the Morse code for the letter V. During World War II, that tune was for victory. However, on that morning of October 7th, it was for vengeance. And during that time, 3,000 rockets landed on Israel, 3,000 Hamas fighters breached the barrier. 1,300 Israelis were massacred, which incidentally is the equivalent to about 42,000 Americans per capita. 250 hostages were taken. The Hamas operation called Al-Aqsa was underway. Over 200,000 people in Israel were internally displaced. And here we are 4 months and 1 week later, and we have 10 fronts to look at in this tiny little war, which turned out to be a little bigger. First, we have the Gaza war. We all know about that. We know about the Israeli Operation Iron Swords. In Lebanon, we have Hezbollah just waiting to be the next war. We'll talk about that. On the West Bank, the West Bank has gotten a little active, and there's been some action there. In Yemen, West Yemen, the Houthis have engaged the United States directly in military confrontation. We'll touch on that as well. Syria and Iraq, they're an old story, but also the U.S. is directly involved as recently as the killing of 3 soldiers just last week. There's an international information war taking place where the truth is being buried left and right. Then the Jewish diaspora has been facing worldwide anti-Semitism directly related to this thing. Then we get to Iran, the octopus in the room. And Iran has developed their axis of resistance, which are basically proxies for their interests. We'll touch on that. For some reason, Turkey and Iran decided to shoot at each other. Nobody really understands why. And then, of course, we have the Shia Muslim situation that is predominantly in the Middle East. We're going to start by taking a look at, of all places, New Jersey. Why New Jersey? Well, it turns out that New Jersey is quite similar to Israel in terms of population, in terms of density, in terms of size. It turns out the GDP of New Jersey, and the per capita GDP is very similar to Israel. Now, of course, New Jersey was formed a while ago. The median age in New Jersey is 70 years old. So let's just bear in mind that New Jersey has a gigantic waterfront similar to Israel, except theirs is on the Mediterranean. And it also has an equivalent to Hamas. They call it Atlantic City. Here's Israel. Israel, 9.3 million population, different than New Jersey, which has everything that God ever created. Israel has distinct sector differences, 74% Jewish, 21% Arab, but the rest miscellaneous. And Israel is only 76 years old. It is quite long, but really skinny. And at a choke point, it's almost unmanageable right here next to the West Bank. The GDP of Israel is comparable to New Jersey, and the median age here is a bit younger, 29 years old. Now, south of Beersheba and heading in this whole area here is called the Negev Desert. In fact, the Negev Desert occupies something like 60% of Israel. So as small as Israel is, it's got to contend with a gigantic desert. 6.3% of the population of Israel are involved in the military. And that's quite different than what we normally experience in our world. I want to talk in just a couple of seconds about characteristics of Israel, to lay some groundwork. In Israel, politics is a national contact sport. And politically, it's a parliamentary democracy without a written constitution. But they do have something called the basic laws, which provide structure and roles for the government. The Knesset, their parliament, has 120 seats. In order to form a government, you need to control 61 of those seats. Netanyahu's party, called Likud, has 32 seats. But in order to get to 61 seats, they had to form a coalition. So they formed a coalition with 5 parties, and now they have 64 seats. So they control 64 seats of the 120. Now, in Israel, you do not vote for president. You vote for a party. So if you vote for a party, the party that has the most number of seats in the Knesset appoints the prime minister. Now, there's no shortage of parties in Israel. Would you believe there are 40 parties, political parties? Not all of them are in the Knesset. The head of the leading party is the prime minister, and today it's Benjamin Netanyahu. They call him Bibi, which is not an insult. It's actually a short word for Benjamin. His background: he graduated high school in suburban Philadelphia, near where I am. He actually went to MIT, studied architecture. He's a graduate of Harvard, I think in business, and he also happens to be the 7th time as prime minister. Does your system work? Well, it's an interesting one, but they have held 5 elections in the last 4 years, so you have to wonder. In terms of Supreme Court and court-related stuff, our Supreme Court has 9 judges. We all know that. They may do 40 or 50 cases a year. In Israel, there are 15 judges, but they do 15,000 judicial actions, courts, a year. In Israel, if you're called for a jury trial, there's a problem because there's no such thing as a jury in Israel. All trials are held with a judge. So you see there's some common differences here. In the military, 6.3% of the population, which is around 634,000 people, participate, either reserve or active. In the military, that's compared, by the way, to 0.007% of the population in the United States for our 2.3 million military people. In Israel, service is mandatory, men and women. Men serve for 2 years, 8 months. women serve for 2 years, and men serve reserves till they're 40. Socially, Israel's known as the startup nation, very strong in tech, education, industrialized things. And there's a funny teaming characteristic. That is, almost everybody volunteers for something in Israel. I've never seen that anyplace else. Let's turn our attention to the West Bank. This little section, which is embedded next door to Israel, is landlocked. It's about the size of Delaware. It has about 3 million people, but in that 3 million people, there are about 700,000 Israeli settlers. The Israeli settlers have about 150 settlements and about 125 outposts scattered throughout the West Bank area. This is an area of contention. Everybody knows that. The place is controlled by the Fatah party, which had an election in 2005 and hasn't had one since. And Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, you've probably all seen him on television from time to time. Now, this slide is a sample of the military side of things for Israel. There have been 17 major military engagements in the 76 years that Israel has been around. I want to call your attention to Gaza War number 1, Gaza War number 2, Gaza War number 3, Gaza War number 4, and guess what? We're at Gaza War number 5. In Israel, I have a saying, never again. Well, in this case, it's always again. So Israel is in Gaza War number 5, and you wonder why their patience is kind of skinny at this point. They don't want to go through Gaza War number 6. Taking a further look at Gaza. Okay, Gaza is 2.3 million people in 3 cities. The median age is about 18, where the world median age actually is 28. So it's quite a young crowd. In fact, over half the population is under 20 years old. That's one of the reasons you see so many kids getting killed on TV. With half the population under 20, there's an amazing number of kids. Hamas rules Gaza. It's a certified terrorist group. It's been in control for 16 years, since 2006. They were actually elected to do their job, and they never called elections since then. The Hamas military wing, which is the one that's in the big news, consists of about 30,000 fighters in about 5 brigades, maybe 24 battalions. They have capabilities of anti-tank, snipers, engineers, and all that stuff. This is another view of the Gaza city. And Gaza city, you have to interpret 3 ways. There is the Gaza Strip, which is the whole thing. And it's about 25 miles long by about 8 miles wide. Then within the Gaza Strip, you have Gaza City. And then outside of that, you have something called the Gaza envelope. And the Gaza envelope is roughly this area for about 4 or 5 miles outside of Gaza. That's referred to in the press. It's very confusing because nobody gets the wording right. So Gaza is about twice the size of Washington, D.C., 25 miles long, 8 miles wide. It's mentioned in the Old Testament. It's mentioned in the New Testament. It's been occupied as a strategic selling or marketing location for just about every civilization from the Babylonians on. For 300 years, until World War I, it was actually occupied by the Ottoman Empire, and it flourished pretty well. You have to wonder what it might have been if maybe it looks more like Monaco or like Atlantic City or something if they had done it a different way. It has long frontage on the Mediterranean, has a great climate. Now, the Gazans are very smart. They are very good at several things. They certainly are very good at creating a young population, but they're also good at creating tunnels. And they have created 350 miles of tunnels since 2007. I consider it the 11th wonder of the world. And comparing that number, we compare it here against the London Underground to give you a sense of how big it is. They're also excellent at an Islamic doctrine known as taqiyya, which is actually a doctrine of deception. It's discussed in the Quran, I believe, where they fooled and blindsided major world-class intelligence agencies on October 7th. Everybody was taken by surprise. Magnificent work for them. They also have a fabulous propaganda worldwide machine running for them. They are probably winning the social media wars these days. And Islamophobia, there's an industry that basically shills for Hamas. Well, more recently, UNRWA, which is the United Nations Relief Agency, has been identified actually as a Hamas operation, and the United States, who was a major donor, the largest donor actually, for $340 million a year, just suspended their money to this United Nations organization. Currently, to me, the Gaza campaign resembles the 1916 Iraq city of Mosul campaign, where they were trying to take over the town against ISIS, the ISIS jihadis. And that took 9 months, just to give us a reference point. It took 9 months to clear the city. Let's take a quick look north. This is North Israel here. This is southern Lebanon here. The Litani River is there. It's about 25 miles between. It was agreed by the UN that Hamas's efforts would be above, the forces would be above the Litani River. They never did that. So Hamas, Hezbollah's forces are now on the border and throwing rockets back and forth with Israel. What we're looking at here is, for like 80% certainty, the next war. It's happening in real time. It's advancing stage by stage as we speak. And it's just sitting out there as something nasty. And it will be a nasty campaign should it happen. I want to spend a minute talking about the difference between the Sunni and the Shia. Most people, unless you're in the religion, would not really have a handle on it. When the Prophet Muhammad passed at 632 AD, there was a contest as to who should succeed him. It was unresolved. The Shia branch said that the leadership should go to Muhammad's cousin and his son-in-law. The Sunni branch eventually said that the leader, who would be called a caliph, should actually go and should be elected from among those most capable to do the job. Now, they practice the same God, the same Quran, the same prophets, the angels, the Day of Judgment, and all that stuff. And they do cooperate on many things, but you'd be surprised how many times they've actually fought each other. And it's an important distinction because Sunni Muslims make up the predominant size of the world, 85% of Muslims, and 15% of the Muslims, 200 million. Many of them are in the region that has turned out to be an issue for us. And you'll see that pop up again in a minute. This is their creed. You'll notice where this is the creed of the Houthis actually published. And you'll notice that death, and curses are the core of their creed, not nice, and they're pointing to us as well. Let's focus for a second on Iran. It's the big elephant in the room. Iran is a 45-year-old country. Republic of Iran. It's about 1,000 miles from Tehran to Tel Aviv over here, 1,000 miles. Now you'll notice that Iran is not connected directly to Israel, but Iran is a country of 88 million. Median age is around 33. The fertility rate is extremely low. I don't know why. It's one of the oldest civilizations of the world. 90% of it is a Shia, but they are not Arabs, and you would insult them if you call them that. They are Persian ethnic people. There are any number of UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Iran. They export drugs, we all know that, but they also have a religion and an ideology which is creating problems in the neighborhood and potentially around the world. They have an army. In fact, they have two armies. They have a conventional military, which is around 420,000 people, but they also have this Islamic Revolutionary Group, which is about 1.2 million people. They're the big elephant in the room. Everybody knows that they are the cause of probably everything that's happening in the Middle East, starting with Hamas and moving on. In addition to this military, guess what? They have something called the Axis of Resistance. And the Axis of Resistance has influence in Yemen, where we're busy fighting this strait here, Iraq, Syria, Israel, Palestine territories, and probably some other places. How big is the Axis of Resistance? Well, if you take a look at it, think this way. We just are dealing now with Hamas in the Palestine territories, and they're around 30,000 people. Hezbollah, sitting up on southern Lebanon, is equally as big, but of course they're far more well-armed and equipped, and there's a major difference between those two organizations. But there's a total of 12 militias listed here, and they're all under the direct influence of our dear friends and in Iran. And so we have here basically a bit of an octopus. Moving on. Oh, moving in the wrong direction. Sorry. Okay, we moved on to, of all places, Yemen. Our last stop, Yemen. We're really not sure who the Houthi rebels are. We don't really know what they want. They came out of the blue. It is a Middle East political movement. Does have an Islamic religious presence, and it is backed by Iran. Some years ago, I think it was in 2015, the Houthis stormed out of nowhere and they toppled the government that was there then, which was supported by Saudi Arabia. And then they entered into a war which killed like 400,000 people. And now they control basically Western Yemen. Now they decided to interfere with the global supply chain that has to come down the Red Sea. Now, if you followed this Red Sea further up, it would take you right to the Suez Canal. So this is the connector between Europe, Asia, and Africa. It has 12% of the global supply chain flowing down the Red Sea through this little strait down here, which is all of 2 miles wide. But it also has Yemen throwing rockets and missiles and drones at it just to keep everybody entertained. So 30% of global container traffic passes through this little 2-mile stretch. You can imagine, if you block that, you're in trouble. Well, it costs shippers an additional $1 million per ship to avoid this in order to go around the bottom of Africa. And also, Egypt doesn't get revenue in the Suez Canal. Not too long ago, maybe 60 days, the Gardens of Prosperity were formed by the U.S. It's a coalition of 20 members. And today and yesterday and the day before, the U.S. Carrier Strike Group 2, which is the aircraft carrier Eisenhower, it's about 70 airplanes, and I think it has 3 destroyers and 1 cruiser in this group. They put out at least 15 or more sorties every night of F-18s focused exactly on all the sections of Western Yemen from which all these rockets and things are occurring. So we're actively at war right now, spending millions of dollars a day bombing. F-18s ain't cheap to fly, neither are the weapons they carry. So that brings us to the next slide. What's next, the day after? Well, I'm not going to try to address that. There are many answers. I'm sure there'll be fodder for a lot of discussion. And we got a lot to talk about there. Thank you for your attention. You can now relax. I would like now to introduce Daniel Pomerantz, the CEO of Reality Check Research.
Thank you, Steve. Chair, how should I pace myself here?
You take your time, Daniel. You go ahead and do your thing. After you two are done, we're gonna we will have an hour of questions from the group, or
Okay.
not questions, but an hour of speeches and questions. So go ahead.
Okay. All right, thank you. Well, it's very nice to meet everyone. My name's Daniel. I'm speaking to you right now from Tel Aviv, where it's 2:30 in the morning. So I'm very happy to be here with all of you. The events of October 7th were really personal. You know, for us, this isn't a political issue. This isn't a story in the news. We know everybody in Israel. You know, it's a small country. Our population is under 10 million. So everybody knows somebody who was either killed or captured. And as you know from the news, the events of that day included mass rape, mass torture, mass murder, mass kidnapping. And not only that, now everybody knows somebody who's serving. Our army is 100,000 regular army, and 300,000 reservists have been called up, and basically all the reservists have been called up. You add that up, that's basically 5% of Israel's population. To put it in U.S. terms, that would be the equivalent of if the United States called up 16.5 million people all at once. Everybody knows somebody who's serving, and we know the people who have died in service, about 200 soldiers that have fallen in combat since this began. So this is very real to us. Israel's mission is to eliminate Hamas as a functioning organization and to bring all the hostages home safely. Obviously, some have died already, but Israel's still working to get everyone home, or at the very least, to bring back their bodies. They can be buried by their loved ones. This is not an easy thing to do. Hamas is a terror organization on the same international lists as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They use human shields. They deeply embed themselves in the civilian population. And Israel is not only using every method that exists for reducing civilian casualties, but Israel is actually innovating new methods. And the world right now is learning from those methods. There's been a lot of hype and a lot of propaganda saying that Israel is either committing genocide or is at the very least too aggressive or too heavy-handed. President Biden, who has been tremendously supportive throughout, recently said that Israel's campaign was over the top. But if we want to really understand reality, we can't rely on adjectives. We have to look at the data and then draw our own conclusions. So I'd like to walk you through some of what the actual data is. And this is numbers that Israel's worked very hard to achieve, and at the cost of time, expense, and human lives in the form of fallen soldiers. There's a saying that if Israel didn't care about civilian casualties, this war would have been over on October 8th, because Israel does have the armaments to engage in an air bombing campaign in the style of Dresden, but Israel is not doing that, and instead doing this the hard way and the dangerous way. All the data we have coming out of Gaza comes from Hamas. Specifically, it's from the Gaza Ministry of Health, but that is just an arm of Hamas. And Hamas has seen to it that it's impossible to get data any other way. There was an expose released by the Associated Press in November in which they revealed what every journalist in the region already knows, which is that Hamas, as a rule, never distinguishes between civilians and combatants. Another thing the expose revealed is that Hamas, as a rule, never distinguishes the cause of death. So, for example, Hamas has fired some 10,000 rockets at Israel. For a while, this lessened off recently, but for a number of weeks, we were running to bomb shelters several times a day, even up here in Tel Aviv. Thank goodness we're not doing that anymore, but our neighbors in the north still are. That's from Hezbollah rockets in the north. That's because the IDF has significantly degraded Hamas's capacity to fire rockets over the past 4 months. But a full 30% of those rockets fall short and land in Gaza, which is a pretty densely populated area. Those rockets frequently kill Palestinians, and also Hamas intentionally executes Palestinians frequently and in great numbers. And on top of that, Hamas uses human shields, not just in the broad way of integrating their infrastructure, but we have stories from the battlefield of Hamas fighters running across from one position to another, literally holding children and running with them in order to give themselves cover. So there are some myths, though, about Gaza. There's one myth that it's the most densely populated place on Earth. It's not. Gaza's population density is 15,000 people per square mile. New York is 29,000. Paris is 55,000. Manila is 111,000. Gaza isn't even on the top 100 most densely populated places. So the problem isn't the density. The problem is the integration of the military with the civilian. Just to give you a little sense, I was on a news broadcast a couple of months ago. So the figures I mentioned here are they're a couple months old, but the principles are still the same. So I'm going to share this clip with you very quickly here. Here we go. Right now, Israel's established a humanitarian corridor to allow civilians to escape out of the combat areas into relative safety. Hamas has been firing on Palestinian civilians, and the IDF has been protecting those civilians by returning fire. Now, this is extraordinary. Think about what this means. So far, over 40 Israeli soldiers have fallen. That means it is not an exaggeration to say Israeli soldiers are literally sacrificing their lives to fight for Palestinians. That is simply extraordinary. Israel's destroyed. And so that gives you a sense of one of the many ways in which the numbers that we get from Hamas are not reliable. But let's say that we accept Hamas's numbers at face value, which you shouldn't, for the reasons that the Associated Press pointed out and for the reasons that I spoke about in that segment. even if you accept Hamas's numbers totally at face value, the numbers indicate that 27,000 people have died so far. Now, if you take a look at the, I'm going to share this with you here. If you take a look at other conflicts in the region, 27,000 would put you right over here, all the way at the left. Afghanistan is almost 250,000. Yemen is almost 400,000. Iraq is close to 500,000, and Syria is over 600,000. So just in terms of gross numbers, this conflict is nowhere near the size of other conflicts in the region. But you guys, being military, are probably aware that one of the most important figures that you use when analyzing whether a military is behaving appropriately with appropriate caution is the civilian to combatant casualty ratio. So even accepting Hamas's numbers, which are which we know are not reliable, even at those numbers, if we compare it to the number of known combatants who are killed, because we do have that data, you can see that the civilian to combatant casualty ratio in Gaza is at just about 1.75 to 1. Now, compare that to other conflicts. The global average, according to the United Nations, is 9 to 1. That means 9 civilians killed for every combatant. Iraq and Afghanistan vary a little bit depending on which study you looked at, but I looked at several and took the average, and that puts Iraq at just about 4 to 1 and Afghanistan at about 5 to 1. Gaza is at 1.75 to 1. That is, so by every measure we have, the actual amount of civilian casualties in Gaza is incredibly low and far lower than numbers that the United States achieves, far lower than the numbers that European nations achieve, and certainly far lower than actual genocides, which often have numbers that are hundreds or thousands or even millions to zero. That's important to keep in mind when analyzing any news. And this has not been easy for Israel to achieve. Israelis put a lot of work into making this possible. I'd like to now share a little clip from a segment that I did that I think kind of gives a good sense of how this all works philosophically. So here you go. This is a clip that I did just recently about the latest diplomacy surrounding our current situation.
Joining us in studio now is Daniel Pomerantz, legal expert and political analyst.
President Biden has been enormously supportive of Israel, and in actions he's been supportive as well, sending multiple aircraft carriers, a tremendous amount of military equipment when it was needed, and speaking in a way that was very strong and unequivocal. But at this point in time, America is an environment where supporting Israel in some quarters is not a popular thing to do. On Thursday, shortly after President Biden said that Israel's campaign in Gaza was over the top, he then went and referred to Egypt as Mexico. But I don't think this was a mistake. President Biden is looking ahead to this next election. But there's another element here. It reminds me of 2014 when President Obama felt that the United States was causing too many civilian casualties in Syria. And he sent the Joint Chiefs of Staff to Israel for what was called the Lessons Learned program, to learn from Israel how in the world Israel gets civilian casualties as low as it does, including in densely populated urban areas where civilians are used as human shields. And this was right after 2014, when Israel had just fought a very serious war with Hamas in Gaza. So what we see time and again is that the United States leaders will sometimes criticize Israel's actions, but when America actually cares about learning how to protect civilians, they look to Israel to teach them how to do it right. All right, so I've always found that pretty meaningful. That regardless of all the talk, at the end of the day, America, when it wants to reduce civilian casualties, actually sends soldiers and delegations and the Joint Chiefs out to Israel to learn the techniques that Israel has innovated in this regard. I think it's best to think of this conflict as being similar to fighting ISIS in Syria. This is not Israel against the Palestinians. It's not Israel against Gaza. It's Israel against Hamas, which is a miserable governing body to live under if you happen to have the misfortune to live under them. As Hamas's power has begun to weaken, we've seen Palestinians not only speaking out, but sometimes engaging in active rebellion against Hamas. The world will be a better, safer place without Hamas in it. Palestinians will have a better future without Hamas in it. And any prospects for any kind of peace really require getting Hamas out of the picture. Hamas has said very openly that their intention is to commit October 7th style massacres again and again and again. And as President Biden pointed out in October, Hamas has said, he has said that Hamas's goal is not independence or dignity or prosperity for the Palestinian people, but rather simply to kill Jews and to annihilate Israel. And that's the truth. Hamas's goal is not a two-state solution or any kind of solution. It's just destruction. It's a disservice to Israelis, to Palestinians, and really to everyone in the world. That's what I have to share with you. So I'll be happy to hear your conversations and any questions or thoughts you might have. If we have just a short moment, there's one last thing I think I'd like to maybe share with you. This is a lot of my friends in America have been very curious about this. This is what it looks like when the air raid sirens sound and you have to go to the bomb shelter. All right, we've got a siren going now, and this one is quite loud. You can really hear it out here. So I'm going to stop taking foolish risks here and go to the bomb shelter. I'm just going to throw my sandals on here, and I'm going to take you with me so you get to experience it again. Here we go. So first I'm heading out my door. And now you can see where I'm walking here. We're going to walk over down the hallway. The sirens are continuing to sound. We're going to go over here into this area. Here we have, this is basically the stairwell, which is already a little bit safer. And then we head just down a few steps of stairs, and here is the bomb shelter. So you can come on in it with me. And in the bomb shelter, we have neighbors and friends and dogs. So everyone's waving hello. So you can see we sort of make a little humor of it to lighten the mood, but the truth is it's quite it is a sort of a high tension experience. We get 90 seconds in Tel Aviv from the moment the siren sounds until we have to be in the shelter, but there are other parts of the country where the time is even less. Anyway, that's what I have to share. I hope I've given you a little window into our life and a little bit of a sense of the overall military and geopolitical picture, and thanks for listening.
Okay, Daniel and Steve, thank you for that introduction to this. And for everyone else, I've kind of given them a little bit of a break, but from now on, please, again, refer to your questions to the chair. I'm going to start off by taking two questions to Daniel and Steve. And I'm not sure if it's Tim or Mike, but Tim, who is our first person who's going to be asking a question for us?
Yes, Chair. Our first person is Kay Halpern.
Okay, Kay Halpern, if you would go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question to the chair.
Yes, I apologize. I sent a message to the person for people whose names begin with H to
Are you
speak.
looking to give a speech?
I did
okay,
not,
Kay.
I did not raise my hand to ask a question.
Okay,
I will listen to the other people.
Yeah, I probably
questions.
confused my participant managers. Let's go ahead with John Steinman, and go ahead and unmute and ask your question, please.
Yes, thank you. John Scheinman in Kansas City. What concerns me most, and it's a question, Mr. Chairman, would you please request information from Mr. Pomerantz about that data about the civilian to combatant ratio? Does that mean that of the 20,000 Hamas militants that he quoted, roughly, if it's 1.5, that means 3/4 of those have been killed and the rest were civilians? Is that Is that what I understand from the data he presented?
Okay, John, thank you for the question. And Daniel, could you please, or speaker, could you please answer that question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The number of combatants killed is approximately 10,000. According to Hamas, in addition to that, an additional 15, would be 15,000 people have been killed, actually 17. So an additional 17,000 people have been killed in addition to the 10,000 combatants. If one takes Hamas's figures at face value, the truth is that those figures are probably exaggerated. But the important thing is to compare that to how it plays out against other conflicts. 10,000 versus 17,000 gives you a 1.7 to 1 ratio. The United Nations has published that the global average is 9 to 1. And Iraq and Afghanistan were about 4 to 1 and 5 to 1. So here we're at about 1.7 to 1. Any civilian casualty is a tragedy, and Israel works very hard to avoid them and cares very much about them. But in a situation where you have human shields, it's not really possible to get that number all the way down to zero, at least not with abandoning the operation and thus putting Israeli civilians in danger.
Okay, speaker is thanked for that response. And Bruce Koth, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and excellent presentations. My question, I guess, is directed toward Mr. Pomerantz. How do we know when Hamas is defeated? Is there a definition, or what's the criteria? Thank you. Okay,
speaker, or the questioner's thanked for the question. And Daniel, why don't you take that one for us, please?
Thank you, Chair. There isn't a definition that's been published by Israel, but it's understood that Israel currently has control over northern Gaza, and Gaza City has just completed an operation in Khan Yunis, which is the capital of southern Gaza. And now Hamas is basically relegated only to the Rafah area, and all the hostages are currently held in Rafah as well. And so once Hamas is no longer present there, Hamas will no longer have control in Gaza. And as far as we know, there's negotiations going on to have Hamas leadership, which is currently living in luxury in Doha, Qatar, that apparently Qatar is potentially negotiating to evict them from there as well. There are some people who say you can't defeat Hamas because it's an ideology, it's an idea. But I like to point out that by that definition, America never won World War II because some people still call themselves Nazis. But of course, there's a difference between a neo-Nazi, which has an ideology and not much more, versus the Third Reich, which had control of territory, a national budget, a national military, and significant influence over world events. If Hamas goes the way of the Nazis, which is to say it becomes a few people in the world who have an ideology, but no real impact on world events, no access to resources, military or national budgets, then Hamas will effectively be a non-functional as an entity. And that's the goal that Israel, I think, can reasonably work toward here.
Thank you very much, Daniel and Steve. And we are going to go now to speeches from you. So for the next hour, we are going to have a series of speeches from you, our listeners, and then we will take questions for each one of our speakers. So we're going to start off again with Kay Halpern. You are our first speaker, and go ahead and unmute and please address to the chair.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. So I'm Jewish, but what I'm about to say may not sound like what folks might expect from the, quote, Jewish side. I'm heartsick over what Israel is doing. I struggle with Zionism. I will say at the outset, of course, what happened on October 7th was absolutely horrible. I certainly do not support Hamas. But what I feel that what Israel is doing is just also extremely horrible. And my story, a little bit about my story. So my first job out of college actually was with the Israeli government. I was working in refugee resettlement with Russian refugees from the former Jews who had immigrated from the former Soviet Union. And I was hired by an international refugee organization, but that was taken over by the Israeli government. So the Israelis that are on this call will know I basically was working for the Sachnut, which is the Jewish agency that promotes Jewish immigration into Israel. And I worked for Jewish organizations for 4 years after that, before I went to grad school. And also during that time, so this was way back 1980, I was in Israel, and I was given a gift by a friend to give to a friend of theirs who was getting married, and to attend that person's wedding, which I did. And it turns out those people were West Bank settlers. And so they invited me to their home, and I spent, a few days there with them. And of course, they were very nice and welcoming to me, a young Jewish American just like them. But I heard when they spoke, every word, every, description of course, they didn't say Palestinians, but Arabs was just like they were non-human. And it just, I felt so horrible hearing that. And,
If the
I
speaker
didn't
could
say
please sum
anything.
up.
So I feel that what's happening now, I guess I'll respond that to the Mr. Pomerantz.
Just to the chair, please.
Mr. Chair, to the speaker, that I feel I participate in many interfaith groups, is Muslim and Israeli Palestinian groups, and I've heard locally and nationally from a lot of people who are Palestinian and a lot of people who are Muslim. And yes, I have some dear friends who are Palestinian. And
I need to ask you to sum up, please.
What Israel is doing right now, what I'm hearing, is Dresden, and that what Israel is planning to bomb Rafah, and the Palestinians, the people there, have nowhere to flee. And, to say Israel is the worst country in the world, I wouldn't say that. That would be anti-Semitic. But as a Jew, it makes me heartsick for when Israel claims to speak in my name as a Jewish state, and when, as an American, when my tax dollars fund a lot of what Israel does.
Okay, Speaker. The Speaker is thanked for that. And now we will take 2 questions for the last speaker. Greg, I see your hand is up. So if you go ahead and unmute and please ask your question to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm somewhat familiar with the living conditions for the Palestinians there. I guess my main question is, so much recently I've seen so many come out in vehement support of them and their conditions, but where were they when things were bad before Hamas decided to launch that and kill thousands of people and rape and murder and take hostages? Where were they before this all happened?
Thank you for the question. Is where was Hamas prior to this? Is that correct?
Where were the supporters of Palestine that are so frequent now? Why weren't they visible before this all happened?
Okay, the supporters of Palestine.
Yes,
okay,
not necessarily in the West Bank and those places, obviously with Hamas there, but in the U.S., in Europe.
Thank you very much for your question. And Speaker, if you could please respond to that.
Yes, they were always here, and they were always speaking, and they were raising issues with regard to Israel's treatment of Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank, and also in Israel Israel proper. It's just that their voices were often suppressed or canceled or not heard. And the reason more people are being heard now is because I think just with what happened on October 7th and then Israel's response, there's just been kind of a huge outpouring of anger and frustration, of course, on college campuses and elsewhere and on social media. And so it's not that people speaking up for Palestinians or Palestinians speaking out did not exist before. It's just that, this extreme dire situation has just ramped it up even more.
Okay, the speaker is thanked for that response. We'll take one more question. And Marty, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead and unmute and address your question to the chair.
Okay, Mr. Chair. My question is, what should Israel do instead, if not what it's doing now? May I qualify that question? May I give more background as to what I mean?
Certainly.
We'll briefly.
Okay, you just tell me when my time's up. So the Gaza is not occupied, withdrew in 2005. When it did, it immediately got rockets in return from Hamas. As the other speakers pointed out, there were 5 conflicts at least between Gaza and Israel. So Israel wants to finally put a total stop to it. So there is no occupation. And Israel is only was trying to prevent arms and building material for tunnels from getting in and restricted the fishing.
Okay, questioner, I think we've got the sense of where you want to go with that, and yeah, we could do that as a speech also. But speaker, so I'll move that question to you. What should Israel do instead?
Okay, well, first, in terms of Gaza, whether or not Gaza was occupied after 2005 when Israeli settlers were withdrawn from there, it was occupied in a sense because Israel controlled all the entrances and exits to Gaza, the air over Gaza, the sea, on its coastline. And so Gazans basically have been trapped, and Israel was squeezing them. And even before then, it's been documented that by a Harvard economist that Israel had been doing, quote, de-development in Gaza, sort of deliberately starving its economy so that people did not really have the means to build their economy and build a vibrant society. And the water and the sewer system and the electricity, system has not been able to be repaired and so on because Israel has blocked access.
So, Speaker,
in terms of what Israel should do. Yes.
Yes.
So I think I understand the impulse, especially if you have your members of your family that have been kidnapped and are in, dire conditions and conditions you don't know what's happening with them or whether they're even alive. I think there may have been other ways other than basically carpet bombing to address this situation, perhaps more targeted, like Navy SEAL type raids of Gaza, of Hamas. And also, in terms of going forward, where do we go from here? There are, I think, some rays of hope, and there are organizations of Israelis and Palestinians working to move forward together.
Okay, Mrs. Speaker, I'm going to have to move on to the next one, but I thank you so much for the speech and for the questions. We are going to go and move on now to our next speaker. And Mike, who is that?
Debbie Silverman, please.
Debbie Silverman, will you
Unmute
please
yourself.
unmute and address your speech to the chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to share some ideas and thoughts I've had as I've agonized over this. I was just reminded a couple nights ago from a history program that the first and second Jewish temples were thousands of years ago, long before Palestinians claimed to have been the original people. My most important point is that I'm agonizing over this issue of a two-state solution, and I've been sitting on the line for a long time until recently, recognizing that you cannot have two states where one of them is committed to the extermination of the other. There are many, as I've researched this, many Arab Israelis have posted videos attesting to the incredibly good quality of life that they enjoy as Arabs, as Muslims in Israel, the freedoms that they have. Also very impressive were several videos online from Mossab Hassan Youssef, the son of the Hamas leader, who as a young adolescent was imprisoned in an Israeli prison with other Hamas people and saw them tormenting and torturing each other if they had any suspicion that the other Hamas members had in any way aided the Israelis. And at that point, he recognized my own people, Hamas, they're monsters. And he turned and for a while worked for the Israeli government. I was astonished when I saw videos that weapons were found in neonatal incubators in the hospitals where Hamas denied any affiliation, and yet weapons were found in the hospitals. One of the speakers made allusion to the fact that Israelis do attempt to save civilian lives. There is a video online that was talking about how much Israelis value human life. A line of tanks was coming, and they showed a baby thrown in front of the tank by Hamas. The tank stopped, and the tanks were blown up by Hamas ambushing them. But that was to save the life of one baby. Hamas could have stopped this whole carnage if they had released the hostages, but they are bound and determined to arouse world
Can I ask the
sympathy.
speaker to sum up, please?
Okay. Just that Israelis warned and Hamas blocked when Gazans tried to escape. I just want to make a point that I have been swayed to the side of whatever it takes to eradicate Hamas, because it's not the Gazan people, it's only Hamas. Thank you.
Now the speaker is thanked for comments, and we will take two questions for the speaker. And Janet, I see your hand up. If you will go ahead and unmute and ask your question to the chair.
Where's the chair?
The chair is
Okay,
me. Yes.
Yeah,
The
I
smiling,
see.
good-looking chair.
You have the
Yes.
logo. My question isn't really to Mrs. Silverman. My question is one of information. How
Okay,
many
we're just
peop-
taking questions from Mrs. Silverman right now, though, or for the
Okay.
chair, for the last speaker.
I'll wait.
Okay, if you could also chat a question to the participant managers, but we're going to move on to, okay, Anna, if you would like to unmute, and Anna Morales, unmute and ask your question for our last speaker to the chair.
Thank you, and I just want to thank everybody and for all the information that was shared. And
okay, just refer to the chair. I'm sorry. I have to.
How does Israel to the chair? How does he protect civilians from us casualties? What is the strategy to protect the civilians. So when going to for like Gaza, no civilian casualties happen.
Okay. Thank you much for your question. And to our speaker then, how do we protect, or how are, well, you heard the question. How do we protect the civilians in Gaza?
I'm a little confused by the question, but it's hard to protect them when the militants are embedded among them. One of the things, they tried to clear passage for Gazans to escape to the safe route in the south, and yet I found things online, videos, documented things, that the Hamas either stole the car keys, blocked the cars, or actually shot their own Gazan civilians rather than let them escape. And again, it's to arouse world sympathies to look at the carnage, but they're causing it, not the Israelis. That's my belief.
Okay, the speaker is thanked. And Philip Garrison, I see you have your hand up. If you have please unmute yourself and ask your question to the speaker, or to the chair, sorry.
Mr. Chair, I would like to state my position vis-a-vis Debbie Silberman's statement.
Well, you could ask, and don't refer to anyone by the name. You could ask the previous speaker.
Okay, I'd like to know by the previous speaker or anybody else who speaks for Israelis. You mentioned the fact that you wish you support the elimination of Hamas. So do I, and I hope they go into Rafah and do what they need to. However sad it is to see the slaughter of innocent Gazans, but I want to build on your statement.
Not just the speaker, please. I'm sorry, I have to be adamant on that.
Speaker. I want to build on the fact that even though things are happening here, the need for a two-state solution is so obvious.
Philip, I need you to get to your question, please. If you want to do a speech, we can do that later, but I need to get to your question.
No, okay. I've been confused by this whole process, but the question is, do you support a two-state solution? And I welcome any other comments from Mr. Pomerantz, because I'm confused of what Israelis are thinking now with all the terrible things going on.
Okay, the questioner's thanked. And for our speaker, do you support a two-state solution?
That was one of my first and most important points. I used to sit on the fence about the issue, but I cannot see the viability of two states when one of them is committed to the extermination of the other. They cannot live side by side.
Okay, speakers thanked. Thank you very much. And we are going to move on to our next speaker. And Tim, who is that?
Yes, Chair. Our next speaker was requested by Len Breslow.
Okay, Lynn Breslow, if you could go ahead and unmute. And
okay, I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you fine.
Good. Golda Meir once said, there will be peace when the Palestinians care more about their own children than they hate us. I think we could similarly say there will be peace when the world cares more about the Palestinian people than they hate us. And by that I mean the things that the Arab leadership have done to the Palestinians are not normally accepted by the world. And that can go back to the refugee problem after the War of Independence. Normally, refugees are handled by UNRWA, for better or worse. At least UNRWA's purpose is to settle refugees, to resettle refugees. There have been over 150 million refugees that UNRWA has. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not UNRWA. That's the opposite. It's the UN High Commissioner of Refugees has had the responsibility for 150 million refugees in its history. Only the 700,000 Palestinian refugees have been handled by a separate organization called UNRWA, whose goal is not to settle the refugees. They are not citizens in any country except Jordan, in Syria, and Lebanon. They are not citizens, and they're excluded from many jobs and professions as a result of that. In Jordan, they are citizens technically, but they are second-class citizens. They are kept in refugee camps because the world blames Israel. If the goal of the 48 war was certainly absolute ethnic cleansing, if not genocide, probably genocide.
If the speaker could please sum up.
Okay, if the world demanded that the Arab countries take care of their refugees that they caused by their war, there would not be most of the problems we have today. And that's a general principle, I think, for the entire conflict since then, including with Hamas.
The speaker is thanked for those insights, and we will take two questions for this speaker now. Now, Anna, I see your hand is up, but I know you've already asked a question. I'll take if there's anybody else with a question real quick. No? Okay, Anna Morales, please unmute and ask your question to the speaker. Refer to the chair, though, please.
I guess my question again was, is there another way to eliminate Hamas? And how can there be a peace process, especially, well, right now it's very difficult with the situation going on, but that, my question is, how can we prevent more civilian casualties?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. And speaker, if you will please.
Excellent question, if I can say. In all these conflicts with Hamas has, as many commentators have said, I think ones that are not particularly friendly to Israel, Hamas is trying to get their civilians, Palestinian civilians, killed because the world will blame Israel. The solution to the problem, for the sake of the Palestinians, is to blame Hamas. Tell Hamas, you are responsible for the deaths of the Palestinians and of the Israelis. According to international law and morality, Israel separates its combatants from its civilians, and Israel tries to target only combatants and not civilians. Hamas does the exact opposite. They target the Israeli civilians, not the military infrastructure. Again, and they put their own people mixed with their military. Again, contrary to international law and morality, I would say. If their goal is to get the world, if their goal is to get the world to condemn Israel, just don't.
Okay. Do we have a second question for our speaker? Speakers, thank for that response. Another question for our speaker. Rosemary Ford, I see your hand is up. If you want to go ahead and unmute, and if you have a speaker or a question for our speaker, please address it to the chair.
Okay, Mr. Chair, as I understand it, the original number of refugees, Palestinian refugees, was around 700,000. The last time I looked, I think the numbers that are covered by that particular pact are now 5.5 million. also part of the diaspora, but they're still considered to be Palestinian refugees. I would like to ask the speaker, who basically made the point about the inhumanity that has been had by making these people refugees for 75 years. What is this? The only solution I can see is to just cut off that refugee status, and probably
So
the worst time in the world. And my question is, does he have some idea what to do about this? I mean, it isn't just a problem for Arabs. I mean, these are human beings. They're world refugees.
Okay.
I think the problem has been making them into a particular
Okay,
class.
so I think we've got your question, Rosemary. So we'll refer that to the speaker. What is to be done?
Excellent question. Normally children of refugees are not considered refugees. And if we've now seen that Hamas has a lot of influence on UNRWA, at least in the Gaza Strip, as they have over I forget what it's called. Never mind. They control everything in their territory because they're totalitarians. So if the refugees were treated finally as all other refugees in the world have been, 150 million, then yes, there would be a couple of tens of thousands of refugees still left, of Palestinian refugees. There would be no more motivation for the Arab countries to discriminate against the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of refugees, really ruining whole lifetimes of these people.
Okay,
and
thank you.
Blaming Israel.
Going to cut you off there. Thank you so much to the speaker and the questions. And we are going to have our next speech. And Mike, who is that going to come from?
Eugene Roots.
So Eugene Roots, if you will go ahead and unmute and please give us your speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking out of only partial knowledge, but, we come with our own opinions and biases, as you said. We were privileged to visit Israel only once, but, got to spend time in Tel Aviv, around Jerusalem, other parts of the countryside, and also the West Bank. So it really understand at some level, not as well as our speakers, the complexity of the situation. Certainly appreciate how hard it is, as the one speaker has already spoken about, living with a neighbor who has vowed your destruction. So this is a really complex problem, and it has been for many years. In that time we were in Israel, we heard from, we stayed in the West Bank for a period of time, so had to go in and out of the checkpoint to see how difficult it was for people who lived in the West Bank, not Gaza, who didn't make it to Gaza, people in the West Bank to go to work, to go to the hospital, to see, what it was to carry on their daily lives. We heard from Palestinian Christians who lived in Gaza about conditions in Gaza. And at the time, I remember, and I won't get my facts exactly right, but that the unemployment rate of young men between 18 and 35 was something around 40% in Gaza because of the restrictions that were placed on them. Now, again, why are the restrictions there? It's because of a variety of reasons. But I just remember thinking at that time, what do you think is going to happen when you have unemployment of young men at that level? What do you think is going to happen? It's happened. So I'm not condemning one side or the other. I'm just recognizing the complexity of it. And to my mind, Israel should have seen something like this coming, because it's going to come with these kind of things. Israel has the power. Israel controls what happens there. And honestly, for some awfully good reasons, because of the situation they live in. So I'll just finish my observations by, I live here in the States, and, we are seeing these things from a distance. But I'm a person of faith. And I guess one of the things that irks me the most, or just helps, makes it hard, is when I drive by a place of faith that says, we stand with Israel. If they don't put both, we stand with Israel and we stand with the Palestinians, I think we've really missed the message here. So Thank you for your time, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, the speaker is thanked, and we will take 2 questions now for our last speaker. And Marty, I know you have asked a question before, but nobody else has their hand up. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to the speaker via the chair.
Okay, Mr. Chair, my question is, given that Israel has tried to make peace more than a half dozen times going back to 1936, why blame Israel for not having peace?
Okay, thank you for that question. And Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't blame Israel. I simply acknowledge the conditions that exist that make it difficult for Israel to live with a neighbor who has vowed their destruction, and for Palestinians to live with restrictions on movement and conditions that would lead any country that had those kind of conditions to have unrest as a result of those conditions. And so I guess I'm faulting both for not wanting a path forward as opposed to their own particular ends in mind.
Okay, thank you for that response. And Robin Lofquist, you have your hand up if you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question to the speaker through the chair.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. The speaker mentioned that he observed the process of going through the checkpoints for the folks trying to come in from the West Bank. And I'd be curious to see what his observations are about how burdensome it was or was not.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Chair, that it was cumbersome to go through the checkpoints. It took much time. On a normal day at off-peak hours, it was half hour, 45 minutes. If you were trying to get to work at a particular time and you were in a hurry, it would be problematic. The thing that struck me was when we visited a hospital, not in the West Bank, but that treated many from the West Bank, is the conditions. If your child needed treatment, the parent of the child could not travel with the child. It had to be somebody else, or you had to send the child by themselves because it was seen as a security risk. So that was one of the things that really seemed most cumbersome.
All right, thank you very much for that response and all the questions and that speech. Speaker is thanked. And Tim, who is our next speaker?
Chair, we do not have another person in queue for making a speech.
Okay, Mike, do we have another person?
I'm sorry. I put my name in the Gustafson to speak.
Okay, so all right.
I also would put my name in, and I just want to make sure it's gotten because no one's confirmed that, and I'd really like to speak.
Okay. One moment then. Everybody, hold on one second. Everybody, stay muted. So, Tim, take another look and see at your list of speakers.
I don't see your names. Please send me another note, and I'll put you in the queue. My apologies.
Okay. And we will take a quick stretch while all you have to do is say, I would like to speak. You have to say what side or anything else or what you're going to say.
Do you want to take one from that on my list?
Well, let's hold off on Tim because it does take a few minutes for each. And
okay,
there we go, Alex. So may I introduce Alex and
okay.
Go ahead.
And then we should be we'll have time to get to our other speakers later. So Alex, unmute yourself and go ahead and give us your speech.
Thank you. You can hear me?
Yes, I can.
So first of all, I'd like to note that nobody has spoken, no Palestinians have spoken. And so I'm not speaking for Palestinians, but I think there's some history that's very important to include. Nobody has given the reasoning, and I'm not trying to justify or support Hamas's moves, but I think this context is important to have. In 70%, at least 2/3 of the people in Gaza are refugees whose homes are in Israel, and they want to return. And unlike what was said, children of refugees, even under UNHCR, are refugees also under international law. And so even people I know who from Gaza don't call themselves Gazans. They call themselves Palestinians in Gaza because of that. I think it's important, some things to correct. First of all, in 1948, as was mentioned, 750 or 1,000 or so were forced to leave. And the UN partitioned most of the land to the Jewish state, even though Jews represented only a third of the population and owned less than 7% of the land. So that's part of the reason that there's Palestinians are wanting to return and have a problem with a exclusively Jewish state. The people talking about a group that stands for the destruction of the other, it's important to understand that in Likud's charter, it states that they will not have anybody other than the Jews control the land from the Mediterranean to the Jordan. So we need to keep that in mind as well. Gaza, as was mentioned by one of the questioners or respondents, has been occupied. That's been a ruling or a statement by criminal international courts. One thing that I think is important also is
if the speaker could sum up, please.
Okay. That one person said that there were no people or that the Jews were original. Jericho archaeology shows that it was a city in 9,000 BCE, long before Abraham migrated from Mesopotamia. It was called the land of Canaan when he arrived. And so I've talked to people who are from there originally, who are descendants, they go back to that time frame. So anyway, I just think it's important that people know that the Palestinian perspective has not been shared, that there's the concept, what Palestinians, the ones that I know, want is equality. And the answer to how to solve this problem is very simple. And that's to offer equal rights to Palestinians that are under Israeli control. And that includes the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem.
Okay, I need you.
And that's the easiest way to get rid of Hamas, is to provide equal rights, just like give the rights that people mentioned that Arabs in
Speaker,
Israel.
Yeah, I hate to cut you off. I think we got a good sense of what you're saying. I would like to take a couple questions for our current speaker. I see Haya Gil. Your hand is up if you want to go ahead and unmute and then ask your question to the speaker through the chair.
Yeah, I don't understand from where the authority of the last speaker to represent the Palestinians, and especially to state here so confidently they only want equality.
Haya, what is your question to the chair? What is your question to the speaker?
That is my question. Where's the authority? Where it comes from?
Okay, thank you very much for that question.
Ideas.
Understood. Okay, speaker, that question to you then, the basis of your...
So first of all, as I mentioned in my talk, I'm not representing Palestinians. And I said earlier that these are Palestinians I've talked to. I recommend Jonathan Kutab's book, Beyond the Two-State Solution, is one. You can also, there are numerous sources. Rashid Khalidi is a professor at Columbia. You can look at his book, The 100-Year War Against Palestinians. And you can read my book. I've written a book. It's How I Learned to Speak Israel, An American's Guide to Foreign Policy Language. So those are some sources.
Okay, the speaker is thanked for that response. And I'm going to go with Sonia Gordon. We have not heard yet from you. If you have a question for the speaker, go ahead and unmute and then ask your question to the speaker through the chair. Sonia Gordon.
Chair.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask the speaker who expelled the Arab or Muslim Palestinians in 48.
Okay, thank you for that question. And
so Yeah. So first of all, I think it's really important. What I heard the questioner ask is who expelled the Muslim Palestinians. It's important to know that the Christians were also forced out, and in fact, the vast majority of the Christians were out. Many who live, for example, in West Jerusalem, and so on. When Resolution 181 was passed in November of 47 for the partition plan. By the way, the partition plan was for 2 states with equal rights for all people in both states, not Jewish have supremacy in one, for example, or Arabs have supremacy in the other. So the Irgun, the Haganah were very active, and in the first 6 months, 300,000 Palestinians were forced from their villages, and that's before Israel declared itself a state in May of 48. Does that answer the question?
We're going to take that as the answer to the question. Thank you to the speaker, and thank you for the questions for this speaker. We are going to go on to our next speaker.
Tedman?
Yes.
Tedman, a reminder that it's 8:30.
Yes, we're going to, I wanted, because they went long, I'm going to extend this further.
Fine.
So I plan for everybody taking questions until about 10 till the top of the hour, and then we will have our wrap-up session to be fair to everybody here who wants to express themselves as well. Mike, who is our next speaker?
Belinda Rockman, please.
Belinda Rockman, if you could go ahead and unmute yourself, and you are our next speaker.
Thank you. I think there's been some inaccurate propaganda about how Israel has tried to protect civilians, because according to the AP News, which is not a left-wing radical news service, 12,300 Palestinian children have been killed and 8,400 women, which means that together they make up 3/4 of the deaths. So the idea that Israel is in any way trying to protect Palestinian civilians is ridiculous. If you hear the survivors who have been freed, of the kidnapped people who have been freed, many of them have said that they were staying in private apartments and that the bombings were terrifying to them. They were more afraid of Israel bombing them and killing them than they were of the people who they were staying with. We are not dealing with a government that has clean hands. Netanyahu has been blocking a 2-state solution for decades and decades and decades. You know what the solution is? A 1-state solution where everybody can participate. The notion of Zionism is preposterous, that God gave me your house. How soon can you move out? There isn't one nation in the world who has land and property rights based on somebody's invisible man in the sky. Everything was pretty kosher until the Europeans showed up after World War II. You had 1,000 years of Muslims and Jews living next door to each other, farming next to each other, being friends. I totally get the desperation of the people who were released from the camps, and they wanted to go and have a safe place to live. And what's ironic is that there was actually serious discussion of taking these people to Baja California, where we would have our southern neighbors having peace, security. Our Bubbies and Zadies would have been having businesses, creating a beautiful place the way they have in Israel.
If I could ask the speaker to sum up, please.
I don't want a penny of my tax dollars being spent on the murder of Palestinian people. If you love Israel, the whole idea is not to make Israel a hated country. We are creating terrorists by what is happening, and Biden's probably going to lose the election because of his association with Netanyahu.
Okay, the speaker is thanked for that presentation and comments. And we would like to have two questions for the speaker. Marty, you've asked some in the past, and I see hey again, so it's the same people. So Marty, go ahead and unmute, and please ask your question to the speaker through the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I don't understand that if everybody was living hunky-dory prior to 1948, why were Jews slaughtered in Hebron in 1929, in 1854, or just even going back further, to when Saladin was in charge in the 12th century. When he captured Jerusalem, he allowed Jews that were forced to live outside of Jerusalem to return to the city. So
your question?
Yeah, so my question is, how is it that the speaker said that everybody was living together peacefully until 1948, and so I gave some examples, how that's a fallacy.
So your question is?
Yeah, why does she say that? Why does she say that they were living peacefully together?
Because for the most part,
okay, thank you. And speaker, please go ahead and address to the chair. Yes.
For the most part, they were living peacefully together. I mean, you can go through history, through thousands of years of history. There have been squabbles between people, but for the most part, Israelis and Palestinians, or not Israelis, the indigenous people who always lived in that part of the world got along pretty well. Now, things might have started getting tense when the original Zionists came in the late 1800s. But for the most part, things were very good there between the indigenous people. It wasn't until the Europeans showed up with, entitled Zionism of we're going to have a Jewish state in your country where Muslim people lived. It's preposterous to base a land claim on some invisible man in the sky gave me your house.
The speaker is thanked for that response. We would like to take another question. And let's see. Yeah, hi, Gil. We're going to go with you. And because everyone else has also asked a question before, so please unmute and ask your question, speaker, through the chair. Thank you.
So I would like to ask the speaker if she thinks the media, especially AP, that in her opinion is friendly to Israel, is more of a specialist about military affairs than people like Colonel Richard Kemp, for an example, or John Spencer from West Point. Aren't their testimonials and repeated statement that Israel IDF is the most merciful and most humane army in the entire world is more compelling than the opinion of a media?
Okay, so Haya, your question is her does she think that
I'm asking if AP, in her opinion, is more of an expert in military affairs to judge the practices of IDF than those who are actually seasoned military people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we've got. Thank you very much for the question, Haya. And that is referred to the speaker.
I think the IDF has a dog in this fight and they want to justify their own actions. I think the numbers speak for themselves. When you have 75% of the casualties being women and children, when the first speaker admitted 50% of the citizens in Gaza are kids. So when you do bombing, they've destroyed 80% of the housing. Where are these people supposed to go? They're already talking about settlers moving in to Gaza. They have a vested interest in getting rid of their neighbors.
Okay, so the speaker just about toward the idea of just that specific question. Do you put more value in the AP reports over those specific military individuals? And I think you answer that because you said the military individuals have a dog in the fight. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We thank the speaker and we thank those questions that have come up. And I think it's Tim. Are you next?
Yes, correct. Chair, I have not received another text from a speaker, though I know there is somebody that wants to speak.
Now, Beverin, you wanted to speak, right?
I wanted to speak. I was messaging Mike because my last name starts with a T.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No, that's the wrong thing.
No. You're doing the right thing. You're doing the right thing. So Mike, let's go to you then. Who do you have? Mike, you're muted.
Yes, Beverin, please.
Okay,
Beverin.
it is. All right, Beverin.
Thank you so much. So my name is Berevan, but you can call me Barry.
And you're just talk to the chair, okay?
And to the chair, I just wanted to start off the chair. I wanted to say, in the most kind way possible, I'm very disappointed in Brave Our Angels not having a Palestinian representative in this conversation. And I don't want to sit here tit for tat talking about data, because I think we're all on the same argument that data can be skewed based on the bias. But I would like to name a few things in regards to people talking about Hamas killing children. Israel is the only country that systematically employs military court systems to prosecute children. To people talking that an Arab does not mean Palestinians. So let's say Palestinians with Israeli citizens have the same right of life in Israel. So about 80% of Israel's state land is designated to non-Palestinians. And in 2008, Israel exclusively became a nation state of the Jewish people, further promoting and downgrading Arabic status as an official language. And another point that I wanted to raise is, while by no means do I condone the attacks of Hamas, to not consider the root cause of this, because Hamas is not an ideological group based on jihadism. It was founded against the oppression of the Palestinian people. And to fight tit for tat, why are there not more conversations about using constructive nonviolence or diplomacy rather than military aggression to cause peace in the nation state?
Is that okay? Thank you. The speaker is thanked very much. And we will take two questions for this speaker then. Okay, Rosemary Ford, I see your hand is up. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to the speaker through the chair, please.
Okay, to the chair. Even at the worst times in the United States, and after all, we had a population who were actually slaves. We had African Americans and Caucasians speaking about peace. We had leadership from both sides, even at the worst of times. I haven't heard any leadership from the Palestinian
and
side.
your question, I'm sorry.
My question are there some Palestinian leaderships who are speaking to living together peaceably? And if so, who are they?
Okay. That question to the speaker.
I think that's a fair question. I'd like to share, in case this is not common knowledge, that Palestinians do not have a strong history of democracy and political parties, and thus the corruption of the PLO is what gave forth to Hamas. I would just like to add, I also do not hear conversations of peace coming from the Israeli government, which recently said, quote, that a national security prime minister said that his right to life outweighs Palestinians' right to freedom or movement in the occupied West Bank.
Okay. All right. The speaker is thanks for that response. And Marty, well, actually, I'm sorry, Marty, I've not heard from Catherine Furlani throughout today. So if you have a question for the speaker, go ahead and unmute yourself and refer your question through the chair, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question to the speaker is if she is aware of Palestinian and Israeli groups in Israel themselves who are working for peace and have been doing that for a number of years. So, for example, there's a group called
Are you just asking?
Yeah.
Does she know those ones? Okay.
Does she know of any groups? Because I mean, I know a couple of them, that I'm aware of.
Okay. And so that question is referred to the speaker.
I do, and I'm very happy about that. I'm very happy to share that I traveled to the occupied territories with an Israeli who is a member of Jewish Voices for Peace, and I wish that there could be more discussion that Netanyahu is not actually the favored prime minister, and he won by a slim majority. People in Israel want to change, and I wish more of those moderate people could come to the table and speak up against him.
Okay, the speaker is thanked for her responses, and our questioners are thanked for the questions. And Tim, did you have anybody who said they wanted to do a speech?
Well, we have Kay who might want to address that question. Nobody has texted me to do a speech.
Okay, well, we'll move to Mike. Do you have anybody who is interested?
Yes, Marty Shore.
Okay, Marty, go ahead and unmute yourself, and the floor is yours. Please speak to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there are several issues I'd like to address. First, I want to begin with indigenous people, because several people have commented that the Palestinians are the indigenous people. Jews have had a constant presence in the land for 3,000 years. The Arabs invaded in 636 AD to spread Islam. They did so throughout the Levant and Northern Africa and Southern Europe and as far east as India, many times under the sword. And the people like Christians and Jews who are not put to death for not converting became second-class citizens. And so it wasn't hunky-dory as some people have suggested. When Jews started coming here, coming to Israel more in the, or Palestine at the time in the 1980s and so forth, they bought every inch of land, and that is not disputed, or at least not legitimately disputed. They bought everything up until 1948, and it was all legal. There had never been a state of Palestine. Never in history has there been a state of Palestine. In fact, Palestine is not even in the Arab vocabulary. They don't have a letter P. And the word comes from the Hebrew Palishtim, which means invaders. And it referred to the Philistines, like as in David and Goliath. And we stopped hearing about them after the destruction of the Second Temple in 586 BC, because the Babylonians who conquered the territory also conquered the Babylonians, and the Philistines, and they ceased to exist. So you never hear of them again until 1964, when Arafat proclaims themselves the Palestinians. And that's fine. There are people there, and they have an identity, and they want to call themselves that. I don't have a problem with it. I'm well in favor of a two-state solution. But the issue is they're not willing to make peace. They started killing Jews, going back to 1854 in what was Palestine, so Jews had to defend themselves. And they continued to do so. That is, the Arabs continued to have terrorist attacks. By terrorist attacks, I mean killing innocent civilians.
Can I ask the speaker to sum up, please?
Okay. I'll go to, so a lot of people want a one-state solution. And I read Alex McDonald's book, How I Learned to Speak Israel. And I'd like to ask or put forward the idea, what would it be like? Would it be like Lebanon, like Yemen, like Syria, like Egypt? That would be the one state, because the Arabs would have the majority, and we see how they rule their areas, their 22 countries. Thank you.
Okay, the speaker is thanked, and we will take two questions for the speaker. And let's see, Kay, you've not asked a question yet. So Kay Halpern, why don't you go ahead and unmute and ask your question to our current speaker through the chair.
Actually, same thing happened again. I am not asking a question, but I was told that I could speak again. So when I get that opportunity, I would like to do that. Thank you.
Yes, we're actually coming up to our time. We'll see what we have, but I don't think we're going to have a chance to give you another opportunity to speak. This will probably be our last speaker. I'm just looking at basically the hour that we have coming up. So I do want to move on to questions though. And let's start with Rosemary Ford again, then, if you could please unmute and ask your question to the speaker through the chair.
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
Okay, Alex McDonald. Go ahead.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask if Jericho was shown to be a civilization in 9000 BCE.
I'd like to ask
Hey, Jet, mute yourself. Jet, mute. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if it was populated in 9000 BCE and 3000 years ago, so roughly 1400 BCE is when Abraham and the Israelites arrived. Then can you explain how Jews or their descendants were in fact indigenous people?
Okay, thank you for that question. And to the speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I didn't really say that Jews were the indigenous people. I said we have had a constant presence there for over 3,000 years. But regarding, whether or not Jews are the indigenous people, an argument can be made historically, because historians who are not going to go by the biblical idea that Abraham came from Ur, which is now in Babylon, Iraq, and then conquered and then his descendants conquered the land. Instead, historians say that the Jews were just another Semitic tribe in the area, and they happened to conquer the others. So that, based on historical evidence, there's not much in that regard. But they were all Canaanite tribes. To say that the Canaanite tribes were Arab, then you might as well say they were also Jews, because the Jews and the Arabs are both Semitic people.
Okay, the speaker is thanked for that response. And Cheryl C., you are going to be our last question. If you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question to the speaker through the chair.
My question is, and I apologize, I did join late, but my question is if the speaker is aware of the desire for a two-state solution coming from Hamas, because I have not heard that. I keep hearing that, the U.S. is proposing two states and various mediators, but I've not heard that as being something Hamas is interested in.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. And to the speaker, someone in Hamas looking for a two-state solution.
No, Hamas has, the best that Hamas has offered so far was a 10 to 15 year ceasefire. Why do they ask for a ceasefire and not a treaty, not a peace treaty? It's because they don't want a peace treaty with Israel. They want to destroy Israel. And they ask for what in Arabic is called a hudna. I might not be pronouncing it correctly. It goes back to the days of Muhammad, when he had a temporary truce with the enemy after he had initially been defeated. And after a couple of years, he was able to rearm and then come back and conquer that enemy. And this is what Hamas wants to emulate. Hudna, allow them to rearm and then attack again. So no, they are not interested in a two-state solution. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much to the speaker. And actually, thank you, everyone. This is unfortunately all we have time for. Again, thank you to our opening speakers and all of those who gave speeches today. The goal wasn't to have a balanced perspective. It was to have your perspectives. And I really appreciate everybody coming forward and saying where they stand on this issue. That was wonderful for me. Super thanks to Mike Shan and Tim Gufterson for their coordination of the event, and for all of you taking time out of your journey to experience this event with us. I want to again note that our veterans and military in the audience, we would welcome you to join us on our mission of combating domestic polarization. The link to sign up for our next welcome event is in the chat. And to everyone, thank you for this gift. I did this so I could listen to all of you, all of your different views, your different ideas, and your different experiences to better understand the Israel-Hamas situation. And I feel inspired and expanded. I hope the same has been true for you. If you want to continue this conversation and you want to contribute to a Common Ground workshop on this issue, there's going to be one on the 25th of February at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And we have put the sign-up link for that into the chat. And if you want to have a conversation, continue this conversation, there's now one-on-one conversations for Israel and Palestine available on Have an Experience at the braverangels.org site. There is a chat for that in the link as well. We do also have a survey because we want to hear from you and what you thought about this event and what you would like to experience from the Military and Veterans Group in the future. And we've put that link into the chat. So there's a lot of links in the chat right now. And you can sign up and hear about the latest updates from Braver Angels Military and Veterans Group by using that link. Now, take a look at those links and make sure you get the ones you want, because we're also right now going to open up the chat to everybody. We just love you to put a word in there to say, this is how I feel: good, bad, happy, mad, sad, hopeful, disappointed, whatever. Give us a one word about how you feel about this whole event. And then that's about it for us. We would like to say thank you again. And you may depart.